Can you see all these wires? They are all coming from the power supply unit. This one, you see the wires are not that many. But when you look into a computer system and you see a lot of wires, most of them are coming from the power supply unit.
You may already know that there are a lot of important parts inside a desktop computer, but what exactly do they do? In this video, we're going to take a look inside to show you the various components that make a computer work. Every computer has a large circuit board called a motherboard. This contains some of the most important parts of your computer, such as the CPU, also called the Central Processing Unit or processor. The CPU is sometimes called the brain of the computer because it processes information and carries out commands. Since it tends to get hot, it's covered by a piece of metal called a heat sink, which draws heat away from the processor. The motherboard also contains your computer's RAM, or random access memory. This is the short-term memory that your computer uses whenever it's performing calculations. However, you can't store your files there because the RAM is cleared when you turn off the computer. For long-term storage, your computer uses a hard drive, which keeps all of its data even when the computer is turned off. Most hard drives use a magnetic platter to store data, but many newer computers have solid-state drives, which are faster and more durable, but also more expensive. If you want to upgrade your computer, you can add expansion cards to the motherboard's expansion slots. You can add a video card to get better graphics performance, or you could add a wireless card to connect to your wireless home network. Of course, your computer's components need electricity to run. The power supply unit is designed to take the power from the wall outlet and send it to all the different components that need power. A desktop computer is a pretty complex machine, but now that you've seen what goes on inside, it should be a little less mysterious.
Alright, good morning. You're all welcome back to class, and today we want to look at computer hardware components. We want to look at the components that make up our computers. And the last time we started with this lesson and we defined what computer hardware is. We said hardware refers to all the physical parts of a computer system that you can see and touch. That is a definition for hardware. So we are talking about all the physical parts of the computer that you can see and touch. As a computer literate, you are supposed to know some basic computer hardware because these hardware directly affect the performance of a computer. If you have no knowledge in hardware at all, you cannot understand software. And computer literacy is the ability to understand and use computer software in an effective way. So to be a computer literate, you need to have the ability to understand and use computers effectively. And this is one of the clues to help you understand and use computers effectively. We learned that when we talk about hardware components, they are made up of core components and peripherals. We talked about the core components and we learned that the core components are four. The first one is a central processing unit. Then we have the motherboard, we have the power supply unit, and the case itself. These four are the core components that make up a computer. Any other hardware is a peripheral. So all the components are peripherals. We learned that we have internal peripherals and external peripherals. We learned that peripherals are in three categories. That is input, output, and storage. Today we want to look at the components themselves and learn what we can about them. And when we finish, we will dismantle a computer or disassemble a computer and each and every one of us will learn how to put the computer back together, because this is basic knowledge. Not only are we going to connect the cables to turn on the computer, we are going to open the computer, remove the components apart, and let you put them together. And this is what we hope to achieve this week. The first component here is the case itself. It says that the computer case is a house for all internal components of the computer. Most casing boxes are made up of either plastic or metal. The main function of the computer case is to protect the components of the computer from dust and other small objects. So when we are talking about these components, your job is to know the names, know how they look like, and their function within the computer system. I'm using two notes that I have prepared to help us get a full understanding of the components we are learning. So the computer case, I have something else written here. It says that this is an empty computer case. It is usually metallic, but sometimes made up of plastic. It is a house for all the internal components of the computer. We know that some components are internal, right? And some are external. The computer case here is a house for all the internal components. So the function of this case is to house all the internal components of the computer system. Without the internal components, it is merely a useless box. But when all the internal components are installed, it is called the system unit. And it becomes the main engine room for all the magic that the computer can do. So when there's nothing in it, it is just a box. But when you put all the components in, it becomes a powerhouse for all that the computer can do. Another primary function of the computer case is to protect the internal components from dust and other small objects. So here we have picked two functions. What is the first one? The first function of the computer case is to house all the internal components of the computer system. What is the second function of the computer case? The second function is to protect the internal components from dust and other small objects. Now, these internal components, they do not need dust. They are not like the external components that have coatings and are protected. The internal components are circuit boards and chips directly, and they cannot be exposed. So they need to be protected from dust and other small objects. Alright, so we are taking computer components one by one, and we've talked about the case. You are supposed to remember what this does, because you are going to be tested on this. Now, when we finish, we are going to do a presentation on the entire computer system. And you will be called to talk about a component or a number of components. So when they call you, you'll be given a component, and your job is to tell us what it is, what it does, how it is used. This is no joke. This is what you really need to understand, and this will help you move a step higher in your quest to be a computer genius. All right, now we are done with computer case. Let's move to the next component. The next component is called the PSU. The PSU, power supply unit. Power supply unit. The power supply unit, PSU, or simply power supply, is a computer component that converts main AC to low voltage regulated DC power for the internal components of a computer. All the components within the computer case are powered by the power supply. For example, the motherboard, CPU, RAM, hard drive, etc. all draw their power from the power supply unit. Now, this power supply unit is the next main component of a computer. We are going to learn the functions of this power supply unit. Before I elaborate on it, let me read it from my second note that I have prepared. And this power supply unit has a lot to teach you, a whole lot. So I'll need you to pay serious attention to this. After our lecture, your job is to be able to identify every component and tell us the functions. And number 3, you are going to fix it at the right place that is supposed to be fixed in the system, because we will assemble the computer back together, and after this, each and every one of you should be able to assemble a computer that is dismantled. Listen, the power supply unit is a hardware component that receives electricity from the main power source and then supplies to the internal component of the computer system. Now, to summarize the function of the power supply unit, that is what I've written here. It receives electrical power from the main power source. Hello. It receives electrical power from the main power source because this is not a battery. When we say it is a power supply unit, it doesn't mean it has power to supply. First of all, it receives power from the main power source, the main electricity running in your building. It receives power from there through a cable. So it has a power socket and it receives electricity from the main source by plugging it in the wall outlet and connecting the cable to the power socket on the power supply unit. When you do that, you provide power first of all to the power supply unit. Please, are you here? Listen. After it receives power, you will see what it does. The PSU has 2 main functions. Please, are you here? PSU stands for what? The PSU has 2 main functions, and listen carefully. The first function is to convert main AC power coming from the wall outlet into DC power for the computer. This is extremely important. This may not make any sense to you if you don't understand anything about electricity. But if you know anything about electricity, you will know that there are 2 types of electric currents. Hello. I said, if you know anything about electricity, you will understand that there are 2 types of electric currents. There are how many types of electric currents? There are 2 types. The first type of electric current is called AC. AC stands for alternating current. AC. The second type of current is called DC. DC stands for what? Direct current. At this point, I will take a short break and play a short clip about AC and DC so that you understand. Because if you don't understand AC and DC, you may not get the function of the power supply unit. So let me take you to a video and explain that.
Hi there, I'm William Mack coming from our Cake Lab in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Did you know that you use 2 forms of electricity every day? Alternating current, or AC, is what comes to your home from your power company. Direct current, or DC, is what your phone or TV remote uses. And anytime you see a power brick or wall charger, you actually have both, because those convert AC to DC. But what's the difference? And why do we have AC and DC? I'm glad you asked. It's not because engineers make things complicated, there are actually really good reasons. Let's start with DC power, because it's pretty straightforward. With DC power, the power supply provides a constant voltage. For example, USB outputs a steady 5 volts. The current only flows in one direction, from negative to positive, even though the amount of current can change depending on how quickly we want the USB device to charge. Now let's talk about AC power. Remember that the A in AC stands for alternating. That's because the flow of current switches direction, or more specifically, alternates current. This is the type of electricity that flows into your home. In the US, the voltage cycles between plus and minus 120 volts at 60 Hertz, or every 1/60th of a second. And because current is proportional to voltage, the current also alternates between positive and negative. You can also see this by looking at how current flows. With DC, current flows from the positive side of the supply to the negative side. With AC, the current flows back and forth. So we covered how AC and DC work, but there's still the question of why we have both. If you want all the details, look up the War of the Currents. At the simplest level, we use AC power because it can be easily stepped up or down using simple transformers. By stepping voltage up into the hundreds of thousands of volts, we can transmit the power at a lower current, and this reduces the amount of power loss and transmission. The voltage is then stepped back down into a more usable range of hundreds of volts that can be used in our homes. Meanwhile, DC is used in a majority of modern electronic devices. That's why most devices have a power adapter like this one. It takes the AC power in your home and converts it to DC power that your device needs. These devices might use or generate AC signals, but they operate from a DC supply. One reason is that transistors, the building blocks of integrated circuits, require a DC voltage. It's also worth noting that batteries output DC power, which is convenient for all of the portable electronics you use. If you want to learn more, visit our newly redesigned Engineering Center website and search the keyword Circuit Basics. You can also join our conversations by following us on our social media platforms. Coming to you from our Cake Lab in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I'm William Mack, and remember to stay curious.
If you have no knowledge of electricity, you will not understand why we have the power supply unit. The first thing to understand about electricity is that there are two types of electric currents. We have the alternating current that comes from the main electricity company. The current coming from the electricity company or flowing through your walls is different from the current that computers uses. I'm going to repeat that. There are two types of electric currents. The current coming from electricity company is a different current from the current that powers computers. The current that comes from electricity company is called alternating current, and it can come in several voltages. What the electricity company does is that they send thousands of voltages into an area, and they have transformers that steps down the power and supplies to every home. Now, the power given to you in your house in the country we live in is 240 volts. It ranges between 220 and 240 volts. That is why when you look here, you can see between 220 240. Can you see something like that? That is the power coming from the electricity company. And that type of current is called alternating current. Computers and other electronics do not use alternating currents at all. Computers only uses direct current or DC. So we have AC and we have what? DC. Computers have specific amount of voltage or voltages they need, and that voltage needs to be supplied in DC. Sometimes we have 12 volts, 5 volts, 12.5 volts, 5.5 volts. Those are the direct DC voltages that the computers work with. Your laptop can never use AC. Are you here? Just take it this way, that electricity comes in two forms, AC and what? DC. Computers do not work with AC. If you supply AC to your computer, you will fry the computer. Computers work with which current? DC current. That is why every laptop charger has a part that goes into the wall to receive AC, has an adapter in the middle that does a conversion from AC to DC and supplies DC to the laptop. The reason why we don't have a straight wire into a laptop is that there has to be some work done in the middle. Hello. So when you check behind the laptop charger, you will see that the symbol for alternating current will be there, and they will tell you that 220 to 240 volts. In some countries like America, they use 110 and 120. And so if you bring a product directly from countries that uses 110 and 120 into our country and you power them, immediately the product will blow. I don't know if you've seen any device that has blown before because of the voltage. And so such products, we need to add a step down transformer, a small step down to them. I don't know if you've experienced those things before. All right, you are going to see the symbol of alternating current, and it's like this, and they'll tell you the amount of voltage. Then you also see the symbol for direct current. It is straight, it has a top straight line and a line under the straight one which is in dashes. That is the direct current, DC. And you see how much DC your laptop uses. If it's 19, they'll write 19 volts. If it is 12 volts, they'll write it. If it is 16 volts, they'll write it. Behind this charger, I can see input and output. The input is saying that 100 to 240 volts. And guess what? I can see something like this, which is what? AC. So this charger can receive from 100 to 240 volts. That means it can work in any country. There are some countries they only use 110 to 120. Other countries also uses 220 to 240. In our country, we use 220 to what? 240. So I can see 100 to 240. Then I also see output. And the output, the symbol is this, straight and dashes under the straight one. That is what? DC. And I can see 19 volts. That means this charger here does a job of collecting AC 100 to 240 volts and converts inside this adapter and supplies 19 volts DC. The 19 volts is not AC, the 19 volts is what? DC. That 19 volts is exactly what the laptop needs to function, and it is DC current. I want everyone to check the input and output and check the symbol and check the amount of volts going through it. Pass it around. Which component are we talking about?
Yes.
The power supply unit. Now listen. The first function of the power supply unit is to convert main AC power coming from the wall outlets into DC power for the computer. And what I'm telling you is that computers do not use AC. Just take it that way. Computers uses what? DC. And what you also have to understand is that electricity coming to the computer is in AC. So what can we do? Now, we have to understand that the electricity current from the electricity company of Ghana is AC. AC stands for what? Alternating current. We also need to understand that computers do not use AC current for power. Computers only uses DC current. And DC stands for what? Direct current. Desktop computers, laptops, and all smartphones only use DC current for power. So, what is the first function of the power supply unit? What is the first function of the power supply unit? All right. The first function of this component, whenever it is given to you to talk about it, because we are going to give you components to do a presentation. Whenever the power supply is given to you, you have to understand that its first job is to convert AC current into DC current. That is its first job. Its second job is this. The second function of the power supply unit is to supply power to all the internal components of the computer according to their various power requirements. Some of the internal components require 12 volts. Other components require 5.5 volts. And others also require 3.3 volts. And so when you check the power supply unit, you see that there are several wires coming from it and several connectors. The second function is to supply power to all the internal components of the computer system based on their individual power requirements. Please, are you following? Do you know there are several components inside the case? Do you know that there are several components within the case? Do you know that? Now, do you know that each component within the case requires power to function? Every component needs power. Without power, no component can function. And so the job of the power supply unit is to supply power to every component inside the case based on their individual power requirements, because some of them need 12 volts, some of them need 5 volts, some of them need 5.5, some of them need 3.3 volts. Are you here? Now let me give you a little insight about the cables coming from the power supply unit. All right, so what I'm holding in my hand is called a power supply unit. It's an old one, but it's still a power supply unit and it still works. Now, I was saying that this power supply unit is a little bit special because it has a small switch here. Have you seen this switch? This switch, if you check this very well, you will see that it allows you to switch between 110 and 220. So right now I'm seeing 230. Now the 220 electricity works within 220 and 240. So countries that uses 220 to 240 is in that range. Are you following? And others you also use 110 to what? 120. That's how it is. So in the whole world, we have some group of countries that uses 110 to 120, and other countries that uses what? 220 to 240. In our country, Ghana, we use 220 to 240. That's our AC current. So right now, it is in the 230 section. If this device goes to a country that uses 110, before it can work, you need to switch this thing downwards. Do you see this switch here? You need to get a small metal and push it down. If you push it down, you turn it immediately into a 110 power supply unit. And that is the only way it will work in those countries. Now, if this thing comes from a country that uses 110 and the switch is down 110, and you in a country that uses 220, you don't know that it is at 110, and you plug your power in this, immediately this thing will go boom, it will explode. Right now, if I switch it down and I plug it now, you are going to hear an explosion. Boom. So before I power this, I have to make sure that it's at the 220 section. If by mistake I bring it down and I power it, it's going to blow up, explode. Do you understand? Some power supply units have other switches. I want to show you a machine that has another switch. This machine here, I can see two switches. I can see the AC switch. Can you see a switch down here? That turns it from 110 to 220 to 240. And there's a second switch here. I think this is even more special. Have you seen a second switch here? This second switch helps a lot. Now, whenever a technician is working on a computer, you need to make sure that there is no power flowing into the system. And so what you need to do is to unplug the cable before you go in, right? What you need to do is to do what? Unplug the cable. And another thing you need to do, even before you unplug the cable, is to press the power button and hold it for about 7 seconds. And when you do that, the machine will go off by itself. Anytime you press the power button and hold for it to go off by itself, what it does is that it drains all excess electricity in any component. There are some components in the system like capacitors. Have you seen a capacitor before? Have you seen a capacitor before? These things here, they look like some small batteries. Please, have you seen these things? They are called capacitors. They are called what? They are called what? Now, the job of the capacitors is to retain some current or some electric volts. It stores power. Do you know how we store data on our storage devices? We store data, right? Okay. Just like your computer memory, which sits here. The memory stores some data so that your computer doesn't have to travel to the hard drive every time it needs data. So it stores some data that the computer uses frequently. That same way, electricity, sometimes some of them are kept somewhere so that we don't have to go and be drawing all the time. We store some somewhere. So these things, their job and their only job is to store what? It to store what? They store power. I like that. Hello? The job of the capacitors is to store power. So even when you remove the cable, there's still some power in. It will take some time for all of them to drain away. Are you following what I'm saying? Yes. Good. Just like those who have UPS, excellent. UPS, okay, so that when electricity goes off, at least your machine will be on for about 5 minutes for you to shut it down yourself or do whatever you need to do quickly before it goes off, because the UPS doesn't store power for long. It only stores power for some few minutes. So immediately it goes off, your system goes off, you have some few minutes to do whatever you need to do. These capacitors, they also store power for the system. So even when there's no power, they have some charges in them. And those charges are enough to shock you, to electrocute you. And so when you press the power button and hold for about 7 seconds, you see that the power will cut. When that happens, all power in the system is gone. And when you remove the cable, you are sure there's no power in it, so you can open it and work inside, right? Have you seen the switch here? I'm talking about the switch here. Have you seen this? This is a switch that enables you to cut power from entering the system even if the cable is connected. So it is an on and off switch. This is not the same as the AC/DC switch. This one is not the same. With this one, if you don't want power in your system, you can just turn it off over here. So when it's at 0, it means off. When it's at 1, it means on. Do you remember binary? 0 means off, 1 means on. All right. Now, sometimes when you are turning on a computer and it's not starting, you've checked everything and it's still not starting. Maybe the only problem is that someone has turned this thing off. If this thing is off behind the system, nothing will work. So you try everything, the power is not coming in. You've checked the cable, you've checked the switch, you've turned on, you've checked everything. The only reason may be because the switch here has been turned off. So you have to take note of this switch. It's behind the power supply unit. So the power supply unit is what is showing here. Can you see it? Hello? When I open this handle here, who can identify the power supply unit? Which one? Is it this? 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 Where? This one? Are you sure? So this is a power supply unit. How can you tell? Can you see all these wires? They are all coming from the power supply unit. This one, you see the wires are not that many. But when you look into a computer system and you see a lot of wires, most of them are coming from the power supply unit. That is it here. Is I following? Now, the next thing to know will be the names of the connectors you are seeing here, because they all have names. And if you don't understand their names, you will not know the jobs they do. So you need to get some insight into the connectors here. But I've given you two functions of the power supply unit. Who can tell me what they are? The first one is what? What's the first function? Excellent. Excellent. It converts AC to DC. AC stands for alternating currents, and DC stands for what? What is the second function of the power supply unit? It supplies power to all the internal components of the computer system. This system unit, we have removed several components, so we don't see most of them, but it supplies power to everything. Excellent. Now let's look at the connectors and the wires and what they do specifically, because if you don't understand them, you will not know which one goes where within the computer. Okay, the first one we'll talk about is this big one here. That is what is showing on the screen. The first one showing on the screen here says the 24-pin power connector. Can you see it? 24-pin what? That is it. When you count the pins here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. I see 24 pins. So this thing is called the 24-pin power connector. It has a second name called the P1 connector or P1 power connector. It is a power connector. All the cables coming from the power supply unit carry power, and they are all power connected. So this one here is the 24-pin power connector. Every computer has the 24-pin power connector. This one is also 24. If you count, you get 24. Hello? So when they ask you, when you are talking about power supply unit, apart from learning what the main power supply unit is and does, you need to learn what all the connectors do. There are some few laptops out there which uses 20 pins. Now we'll learn what this connector does. Its main job, listen, is to power this thing here. Give power to this. Have you seen the connector inside here? Have you seen this particular port here? Have you seen this? Every computer has some. Where can we find those ports? Where? On the motherboard. The motherboard is big and has several components on it already, and so the motherboard itself needs power. The CPU is on the motherboard, the RAM is on the motherboard, the extension ports are all here, and they all have devices connected to them. All these I/O ports are here. They all need power connected to them. So the motherboard needs a lot of power. So there is a giant connector designed for the motherboard, and that connector is called the 24-pin power connector or the P1 power connector. And this 24-pin power connector, you need to turn it the right way, and you just give it to this directly. Have you seen it? So this is what power is what? This is what power is what? This is what power is what? The motherboard. Listen, the 24-pin power connector, can you see the screen? The 24-pin power connector is the main power connector that powers the what? Hello, can you see on the screen? Is the main power connector that powers the motherboard. It is also known as the what? P1 connector. Sometimes it has only 20 pins for certain motherboards. There are some few motherboards out there that uses 20, but 95% of all computer motherboards uses 24 pins. So I'll just give 5% to some few machines out there that uses 20. Now, if your machine uses 20 and Your power supply unit is providing 24. What do you do? To solve that problem, this machine again has a very special power supply unit. You see this 24 pin. It is designed in a way that you can separate the 4 out and have what? That's amazing. It's designed in a way that you can separate the 4 and have 20. So this one can be used in machines that uses 20 pins. And if you need to use 24 pin, all you need to do is to join this one here. And it becomes 24. And no one will see it. 24. It works perfectly. Alright. So this is a P1 connector or the 24 pin power connector. The other connector you need to know about also powers the motherboard. This is called the 4-pin power connector. It's called the what? And it also powers. You need to turn it the right way because of the locker here. So you need to study the locker, check on this, and know how to connect it. This is also going on to the motherboard. Wait a minute. Is this machine also having a 4-pin? Or the 4-pin is attached to the 24 pin? Let's find out. Are you here? Hello? Hello? Have you seen this? Apart from the 24, it also has additional 4 pins. That is also going into where? Now listen. The 4-pin power connector, can you see on the screen? The 4-pin power connector is designed to give what? It's designed to give additional power support to the motherboard. It is also known as the P4 connector. This is also called the P4 connector. So when we say the P4 connector, we are talking about the 4-pin power connector. Sometimes, listen, sometimes, and some machines have 8 pins instead of 4. Some motherboards have 8 pins instead of 4. Hello? And the job of this is to give what? Additional power support. Additional what? Support. Do you know what support means? Do you know what support means? When we say support, what do we mean? Assistant. Assist. Excellent. So the motherboard needs a lot of power, and sometimes it needs a support. It needs a support. One reason is that the CPU can go high or low. Sometimes can run very fast, become extremely hot. Sometimes it's low. It needs power all the time. Do you see these ports here? Yes. We call them slots. Have you seen these slots here? Please, have you seen these slots here? They are extremely important on motherboards. They are what? They are extremely important on motherboards. They are called the expansion slots. Expansion slots. And these expansion slots have names. We'll be talking about their names. This particular white one, you see how it looks like. Can you see how it looks like? That's how you recognize it. It has a name. And this long one here also has a name. This one is going out of the system, and more of these are being made. And this particular one here is made in 4 types. So as you learn about this, you will learn about the 4 types of this. They are all expansion slots. But this is one type, this is another type. Hello? Before we come to the expansion slots, and before we pick their names individually, let's talk about power coming onto the motherboard. We have power coming through the 24-pin power connector. This is the main power to the motherboard. And we have the 4-pin power connector, which gives additional what? Power support to the motherboard. So let me isolate the connectors. This is one. And we've also dealt with this. You remember this one? What is it called? P4 or 4-pin. Okay, so now we are left to just about 2 or 3. But those 2 or 3, they are many. So don't think we have a lot of work to do. We are just left with about 2 or 3. This is one type. Have you seen this? This is the second type. Have you seen this? And the last one is the small one we see here. So there are just 3 connectors to talk about. Actually, these 2 are the main ones to talk about because this one is totally out of the system. We will never use this again unless something strange happens. But this is out of the system. This is what we are using. This one is going out of the system. This is what you need to pay attention to now. Hello. Have you seen how it looks like? When you see it, will you recognize it? Okay, so I'm going to show you what this one does. Are you with me? Have you seen this connector here? Please, have you seen this? Is it the same as this? Is it the same as this? It's most definitely the same. Is it the same as this? Is it the same? It is the same. Is it the same as this? It is definitely the same. This is a modern type of power connector being used to power this. This is inside every computer. In this computer, this is where it's supposed to be. This is where it's supposed to be. Do you know what is kept here? That's what I'm holding. This is supposed to be here. What is this? What is this? Who can tell me what this is? Pardon? What is HDD? We talked about this. Last time we talked about this. This is called a hard disk drive. Now, your hard disk drive, do you know what it does? Do you know what this one does? What does it do? Your hard disk drive, what does it do? Excellent. Are you here? Every information or data on your computer is on your hard drive. Every information on your computer is on your hard drive. When someone opens your computer and removes this, they have removed everything the computer remembers, including the operating system, all the programs installed, and all your personal data. Everything is here. This is what stores every information on the computer. So it is very important, right? Okay, now this particular component is one of the most important ones. We learned that it's a peripheral. That's why we're amazed that this is a peripheral. Okay, it needs power to function. It needs what? So this connector is what is designed to power this important, extremely important component. This is one of the extremely important components in your system. This is one of the most extremely important components in your computer. Without this, your computer cannot even start. Without a hard drive, your computer cannot what? It can't start. Now, this hard drive, it needs power. I said this is called what? The hard disk drive. It's also called hard drive or hard disk. It needs power, right? This power connector is what gives it power. The name of this power connector is what defines the type of hard drive we are having. And so I'll tell you the name of this power connector. What do you see here? What do you see? It is called the SATA, serial ATA. Sometimes we'll call it serial ATA or serial advanced technology attachment. SATA. Just call it SATA. It is a SATA power connector. This is how it looks like. Don't forget this, because this connector is the modern one and extremely important, and this is what powers your hard drive. It's called a SATA power connector, and this hard drive is called a SATA hard drive. The reason why this hard drive is a SATA hard drive is very simple. In the past, we used to use a different type of hard drive. The hard drive we used to use had a different power port here. You see the port here? This is what we used to use on older hard drives and older. What is here? What is here? Optical disk drive. This is an older one. Please, are you here? This is an older optical hard disk drive, and this is an older hard drive. In the past, we used to use these types of optical disk drive and hard drives that used this power connector. Have you seen this one? It looks different from the SATA. Let me show you the SATA one again. This hard drive, you tell me whether it uses SATA or this. Is it using SATA? Hello? Is it using SATA? If it's using SATA, then this one should be able to connect to it. So if I connect and it works, that means it is using SATA. Did it work? Did it work? Yes. So is it a SATA hard drive? Yes. It is a SATA hard drive. This is also a SATA hard drive. Look at this hard drive. Is it a SATA hard drive? Is it a SATA hard drive? You should be able to tell because it looks very different from this. Can't you tell the difference? So when you see a hard drive like this, you should be able to tell or answer the question whether it is a SATA hard drive or not. Is it a SATA hard drive? So I need to use a SATA connector to give it power. Did it work? Yes. So all the SATA hard drives uses a SATA power connector. But the older hard drive was called PATA, not SATA. This one uses parallel advanced technology attachment. This one uses serial advanced technology attachment. This one uses parallel advanced technology attachment. So this is called PATA and this is called SATA. This is called PATA and this is called SATA. So when we say a PATA hard drive, this is a PATA hard drive. When we say a SATA hard drive, this is a SATA hard drive. How can you tell? You can only tell based on the power connector it uses. Are you here? Please, are you here? Now, the PATA hard drive is also called IDE. So when we are talking about types of hard drives and you hear IDE hard drive, IDE. Okay, IDE is the same as this. When we are talking about optical disk drive and you hear IDE, it's the same. Hello? Hello? Every drive, take it from me, every drive requires two connections. One for data, one for power. Every drive requires how many connections? Two connections. One for what? Data, and one for what? Even your hard drive, whether SATA or PATA, requires two connections. You can see from here that there are two wires or two cables connected. Can you see the two cables? In SATA hard drives, the small connector here is for data, and the big one here is for what? You can tell it's power because it's receiving the cable from where? The power supply unit. Please, are you not here? It's receiving the cable from the power supply unit. Now, very soon we'll talk about how it receives data or how it transmits data onto the motherboard so that the CPU and other components can communicate with it. It uses this. This one here is a SATA data cable. SATA data cable. SATA data cable. SATA what? Data cable. And this one here is SATA power cable. SATA power cable or SATA power connector, and this is the SATA data connector. This is for data and this is for power. So this one here sends power into the hard drive because the hard drive needs power, and this one right here connects to the hard drive to read and write data. With the older technologies, the data cables was long, and so the cable we used to use, this one, the IDE data cable, is a long one that is connected here, but the IDE power is here. Do you know how we power IDE? With this connector. Have you seen this? Hello? With this connector, when you connect it here, you give power to your hard drive. Or if you are having optical disk drive, the same connector give power to it. Because it's the old type, you see that the data connector here is long. With the modern technology, it is using this short one. This is more powerful than this long one. This is the IDE or PATA optical drive. This is the IDE or PATA hard drive. But the name of the connector here is the next connector we are using here. The next connector here is called what? The Molex power connector. This is the Molex power connector, and the reason why we call it Molex is because it was designed by a company called Molex. Hello. So some years ago, this was the main power we used to use to power our hard drives and optical drives and any drive in our system. So this used to be very famous, but now it is getting out of the system because of the SATA technology. Hello. Now let me read about the SATA again, then we'll talk about the Molex. SATA power connector is a new power connector for connecting all SATA based hard drives and optical drives. Have you seen them? Have you seen what I read? Yes. SATA power connector is a new, is it new? Have you seen the SATA power connector? This one. Have you seen the SATA power connector? We'll do a presentation of what I'm doing, and everyone will be asked to talk about all these things. When you get here, this is called the SATA power connector. Hello? It's called the SATA power connector, and it is a new power connector. Which one is the old one? the Molex power connector. This is called Molex. When you talk about a PATA, you are talking about the hard drive. This is a PATA hard drive or IDE hard drive, or the optical disk drive, PATA optical disk drive. The optical drive in this machine here is locked with a screw. Hello, I'm going to show you this optical disk drive, and I'm going to ask you whether it is SATA or IDE. I'm going to show you, and I'll ask you whether it is SATA or IDE, and you can tell by looking here. Is this SATA or IDE? Is this SATA or IDE? You can tell by looking here. I'm going to show you a hard drive, and you tell me whether it's a SATA or IDE. Now, sorry, this is a hard drive, right? All hard drives look the same, but to tell whether it is SATA or IDE, you need to look here. Tell me, is this SATA or IDE? Is this SATA or IDE? Okay, so this is why I got you confused, but I'll tell you something. This is SATA, right? Yes. So when I take the SATA power connector, it should be able to connect. Have you seen it? Yes. Did it connect? Yes. Okay. Now, the new hard drive I brought here is a weird hard drive. This one, is this SATA or IDE? Is this SATA or IDE? If it's SATA, then this should be able to connect. Did it work? Is this SATA? Okay, fine. Now, this particular hard drive, it was made at a time when we were transitioning from SATA to IDE. So do you know what they decided? They decided to give it both the Molex or the IDE connector and SATA. Can you imagine? This particular hard drive is SATA. This is a SATA hard drive. It will also use a SATA data cable. All right. But they also made room for this. So if you don't have this, you can use the Molex to connect to it, and it works. It's very funny. This one you'll not be seeing it out there, but I'm just showing you. It's only here that you find this. Okay, now listen. This one here, is this SATA or IDE? Is this SATA or IDE? It's IDE. It's not SATA at all. So it uses this connector. This connector is called what? The Molex power connector. So the Molex power connector is called Molex because it was made by a company called Molex. Now, if you look into your system unit, apart from the P1 and the P4 connector, the rest are mainly the Molex and the SATA. The reason why your power supply unit may give you all the two is that the power supply unit does not know whether you want to use a SATA hard drive or a Molex hard drive or IDE hard drive. Please, are you with me? Because if you are using the old hard drive, they want to allow you to connect. Nevertheless, if you have a modern computer, you are not going to see this. What I mean by modern computer is computers that are newly made. So this particular power supply unit, can you see all the two here? Can you see all the two here? That means it allows you to connect to both, because it doesn't know whether you have the IDE or SATA, right? Now watch this. Inside this system unit, you can see one slot. Let me remove this cable. Talk about this later. You can see another slot. That means over here you are allowed to connect 2 different hard drives. It's possible to put more than 1 hard drive in your computer. Most computers have just 1 hard drive, but it's possible to connect 2. Some machines can even allow you to connect 3 or more. So we need more cables like this, so that if we want to add more hard drives, if we want to upgrade our computer, if we want to upgrade our computer by adding more hard drives, we can still have power cables to connect them. Our optical disk drive is here, just like the one I removed. It also needs power from the power supply unit, and if you check and a SATA, you need to find a SATA connector for it. If the SATA connectors are finished and all you see are molecs, you can get extensions here like this. You see this? This one is a converter from molecs to what? Okay, it's also a little bit rare to find this, but I'm happy I have all of them to show you. So this connector, what is it called? The 24-pin power connector. This one, what is it called? This connector, what is it called? SATA power connector. This connector, what is it called? Molex power connector. So we've learned about 4. This small one is called mini molex power connector. Mini molex. Mini molex. Mini molex. Mini means what? Small molex. So mini molex. This mini molex, I told you we are no longer using them because there used to be a drive inside here. That particular drive appeared here. Last time I talked about it. Now we don't make them anymore because we don't need them. What's the name of that drive I talked about last week? I talked about a certain small drive we put here that we are no longer making them. The floppy disk drive. So the mini molex was used to power the floppy disk drive. They are all power. They are all power. They are all power. They all give power. So now when we pick the power supply units, now I've given you a general understanding of the power supply unit. You know what the power supply unit does, you know the functions, and you can tell what each cable here does. They are all supplying power, but this one is called the what? 24-pin power connector. What does it do? Supplies power to the motherboard. Then you move to the 4-pin power connector. This is called the 4-pin power connector. What does it do? It gives additional power support. It gives additional power what? Support to the motherboard. Then we talk about this connector. What is it called? SATA power connector. What is it used for? After all I've demonstrated, what is this connector used for? What does it do? It gives power to what? The hard disk drive and the what? The optical disk drive. And it's a new type of connector. It is a new type of connector, right? The next connector is this. What is it called? The Molex power connector. What does it do? It has the same function as the SATA power connector. The same. It gives power to hard drives and optical disk drive, and is it new or old? It's the old power connector. So the difference between the Molex and the SATA is what? One is new and one is what? That's all. But they all have the same functions, right? The only one left is this small one here. What is it called? The mini Molex power connector. And what does it do? The floppy disk drive, not floppy disk. Because floppy disk is different. Floppy disk drive, right? So this powers a floppy disk drive. Alright, so this is our studies on the power supply unit. Next time we will take the motherboard and we will go into details a little bit, and we'll talk about the motherboard, what it does. Hello. Hi. We'll talk about the various components here, what each one does. And like I said, you are going to do a presentation and you are going to do an assembling. Assembling means that the components will be disassembled or separated, and your job is to assemble, fix them back, and power the computer, make sure it works. Hello? Hi. Hello? Hi. What is this? Oh. Huh? It's not fun. So, when I finish with my presentation, your job is to pick the components one by one and tell us what they are called, what they do, and where they are fixed, and you fix them. So assemble a whole computer, and that is it. So not today. Oh, not today. Okay, so we will continue next Wednesday. So next Wednesday we will finish and we will have our presentation. All right, so if you want to learn more, make sure you go through the videos on this channel and study all that we've done previously and anything useful to you. And if you want to learn more from me, make sure you subscribe to this channel and leave a comment under the video, and make sure you like the video and share with others who want to learn about computers and engineering. And I will see you in the next video.